Good morning, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. This is going to be episode one of a new kind of series I'm doing about going through The Awakening from the Meaning Crisis by John Vervaeke. So, I've been familiar with John Vervaeke's work for a while now, um, probably 3 to 4 years, something like that. And I went through the series, The Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, a while back. I think that was the first thing that really caught my eye with him. But when you're doing like podcasts, you're not really paying attention, right? So, you're commuting or you're working and it's going on in the background or something like that, right? So you're kind of paying attention, but you're kind of not paying attention. And they're pretty long. They're about an hour each, and there's 50 of them. So it is quite a meaty series. So my thought was I'd go through them again, years later, and I'd actually like pay attention when they're running this time. And I thought that it might be interesting if after I do an episode, that I just talk about it a little bit, right? So the normal way of doing like a review is the normal way on YouTube of doing a review is something like you'll let a minute play of like a clip and then you'll like comment on it and then you'll let another section of the video play and comment on it. And I think that's good for like reactions, but I don't really want to give a reaction per se. I want to give like my thoughts uh, that I'm having them. So as I'm watching the video, I'll take like a note here or a note there. And my thought is I'll just comment on it and then I'll do it and I'll make it more of like a podcast formation or a podcast format and just post that. So I won't be splicing in any clips. I'll just be going like episode by episode and just pretty much give you my thoughts on the situation. So we started with episode one. So there's actually like an episode zero that was like a minute or something like that. And in that episode, all he pretty much said was, why? Like, why try and do the meaning crisis? And the gist was, that our culture's not in good shape, right? There's kind of like a mental illness crisis. And then, well, it's a meaning crisis, right? So it's a meaning crisis, and then he like defines meaning crisis, and that has things to do with like mental illness and people, they're not satisfied with their lives, and we're not socializing as much as we should. And then his kind of like his outline of his solution is we're going to try and engage in something he calls awakening, and that will have like a lot of strategies, right? So he'll look into science, but he'll also look into like past resources, like there's this whole concept of like psychotechnologies that he has, and trying to go from the past to like pull out psychotechnologies that existed back there. So so that was pretty much episode zero, and then we got to episode one, which he talks about the mindfulness revolution. So that's interesting. So I want to talk a little bit about that mindfulness. Yeah, so mindfulness, I don't know, like my opinion on it, like it seems it's kind of a epithet of like California Buddhism, and when I hear mindfulness, I kind of think of that, right? So I'm pretty skeptical of it. Like it seems to be just trying to like hack your mind, like kind of just like bend your mind to your will instead of like actually trying to like listen to it or have like a real relationship with it, right? So that tends to be like what boils up to the surface in these kind of things. Although of course, as on an individual basis, it's going to be whatever you make of it, right? So if you go into it with, with let's say, the right mindset, then mindfulness, I think, could be something much more than just kind of like, you know, the new fad or just trying to like hack your mind. So you're like maybe you feel like you want to make more money or something like that, and so you want to just hack your mind. So yeah, so I guess that's kind of like my thoughts on mindfulness. So his idea with the mindfulness revolution is pretty much that, right? His thoughts on the revolution is, as I recall, it's just that there was one, right? So that mindfulness is, making a comeback, and it's something that most people have heard the term of, and it's kind of like something that people are engaging with. He actually mentioned that he wrote a book called Zombies in Western Culture. So I thought that was interesting. That I didn't remember him ever mentioning the book. He had like a co-author, so it wasn't just him. I don't recall who the co-author was though, but in any case, that's interesting. That's something I'll have to look up and see if it's something I would find interesting or not. So, yep. So he mentioned a book about zombies in Western culture, and I do remember him talking a little bit about zombies and mythology, and that was just something like that mythologies kind of represent like maybe like the mood or like a deep sense of like the crisis that we're feeling. So, like something like vampires would represent something, and then zombies would represent something else, right? And you can kind of look at zombies and see like, they have no minds, but they hunger to eat brains, and they're kind of like the Walking Dead. They're like a violation of category. Like they should be in the ground, lying still, but they're actually up and walking around, right? And things like that, right? And they have like a crowd aspect to them, you know, so kind of like a mob, right? They have like a mob kind of feel to them. So things like that. So that the kind of like sense of the zombie can give us clues into the crisis that we kind of the like kind of like taste of the crisis that we're feeling at a time. So I'm assuming that that's what the book is about, but I actually don't know. Another thing he talks about meaning, right? So meaning is a huge thing, right? So obviously waking from the meaning crisis. So he talks about like what is meaning and the history of meaning a little bit. And in this thing, he gives an exact definition that I don't think I'm going to be able to fully articulate off of memory. But basically, it's feeling connected and important to something, right? So it's like, do I matter to this thing, and am I connected with this thing? Like, does me and it being together as one object, does that kind of make sense? Does it feel right? That kind of thing, right? And then he gives a kind of like a technical definition of awakening, right? So it's awakening from the meaning crisis. The title kind of like, when I hear the title, I kind of presume that awakening is kind of an optional word, right? So it could be something like leaving the meaning crisis and be like, oh, well, that would mean the exact same thing as what the title is. But no, that's actually wrong. So he actually, like, the term awakening is actually meant to specify something in particular, right? Where something like leaving the meaning crisis wouldn't actually like catch what he's actually trying to say. And basically, it's kind of like enlightenment experiences is what he means by awakening. So, and this can be like mystical experiences, and it can be like religious experiences. And he'll talk about like psychotechnologies a little bit later about like how things like drugs or music or fasting or things like that. That these are all kind of like ways of achieving this kind of enlightenment experience or this kind of like. So enlightenment would be, I guess, like the big end goal, but just kind of like proving your mind maybe is a way to say it. So instead of like full on enlightenment, just becoming like more awakened is something maybe is like a better terminology. But yeah, but when awakening from the meaning crisis actually means achieving a degree of enlightenment that will cause connectedness and fittedness in the world, and presumably that will end the crisis, right? So that's actually like the strategy. So when the title says "Awakening from the Meaning Crisis," I think that's what it's meant to convey. Is like practices leading to enlightenment, which causes connectedness, which resolves the crisis, right? So that's kind of like the formation that I'm hearing from him. And then he starts going into like history of like psychotechnologies and religious practices and stuff like that, right? And of course he mentions that these kind of things are very deep, right? That they go back even like pre-human, so like animals have rituals and do stuff like that as well. But since that's way too big of a category to go in, he says we're just going to start with humans, and then he's going to start with what he feels is a very important date, which is 40,000 years CE, before the Common Era, is how he says it. So yeah, so I'll just say 40,000 years ago that human beings became almost extinct, and the solutions that we came up with at that time weren't really like technological per se. So it's not like we invented farming to solve that problem, or we invented the bow to solve that problem, or something like that. That the problem that we actually that got us out of extinction was cultural solutions, right? So psychotechnologies that build cultural categories, I guess is a way of saying it, and that those are actually what kept us from going extinct. So I think the 40,000 years ago was homing in on like the going extinct, but the psychotechnologies, I think he mentioned that that stretches back to like 100,000 years ago or something like that, and that's where you get like you know rituals around trade, religion, and music and stuff like that. That's where all that starts coming up. Then he mentions that how that we have a lot of rituals that we might not think as rituals. Maybe we do them, but we don't really think of them as a ritual. And he mentioned something like shaking hands, right? So that like that when you meet somebody, you shake their hand, and that's kind of like a ritual that gives certain affordances. So here I wanted to make a commentary, like what my thoughts on it was. So he does two things. He mentions the rituals like shaking hands, but then right after this, he's going to mention things like shamanistic rituals, right? I'm not totally sure like what his point, because he actually says that with like shaking hands is a way of like getting into your mind. But then but he also makes a comment of like a ritual is asking how are you doing, even though you don't want to know how the person doing. If the person starts like actually answering how they're doing, they're not gonna you're not gonna be happy with that, right? So when you ask somebody how are you doing, it's a ritual thing, and you don't actually want an answer, right? So he gives these two examples, but then he says it's a way of getting into somebody's mind. But I think that's actually opposite. I think that the rituals actually allow for the state of the mind of the other person to kind of be irrelevant, right? Because if you're actually going to be dealing with somebody, like you need to know what their state of mind is, right? But knowing what their state of mind is so costly that it's not an actual solution. So you actually have to make their state of mind irrelevant, right? So this is not his opinion. This is my opinion, right? So the goal of these kinds of rituals are to make the state of the other person's mind irrelevant. It's not to know it. It's not. It is in a sense to not know it, right? But the goal is actually irrelevancy, right? So if their state of mind is good, okay, it's irrelevant. If their state of mind is bad, okay, it's irrelevant. And shaking hands or saying how are you doing is getting you towards that goal, right? Where he doesn't expressly say that, but he kind of implied it with the ritual of how are you doing, but it wasn't explicitly said, or at least I didn't catch it. But that's kind of my opinion on it, right? So, but then he gets into another kind of ritual, which is the shamanistic ritual. And the shamanistic ritual is the exact other kind of ritual. It's not just that it's costly to know what the other person is thinking, it is actually super difficult, right? So, to actually get into somebody else's mindset is actually really, really hard, right? And a shamanistic ritual is very, very costly, but it is actually designed to do the opposite of like kind of mundane rituals. It's actually to make the state of somebody's mind the thing of relevance, right? Instead of making it the thing of irrelevance. And then he's mentioned psychotechnology. So psychotechnologies are just that. They're a bunch of tools that will let you, to different degrees, engage in these kind of rituals, right? So he just he likes making up his own words. That sounded worse than I meant. He likes maybe inventing words to kind of like force you to reconsider like what he's saying. I don't know. I'm kind of mixed opinions on this. I guess I will say I don't know if it's the right strategy or the wrong strategy, so I won't comment about that. But I would say, all things being equal, I think it'd be better. I would prefer. I'll say it that way. I would prefer that he didn't do it, but you know, it's his thing, so he does it. So we'll run into quite a few of those. First one we have here is psychotechnologies, right? So it's just technologies applied to the mind to help you, achieve something. To get the mind to do something that it couldn't do before, right? So and he gives like an analogy of like software versus hardware, right? So, psychotechnologies is kind of like putting new hardware, or sorry, correction. Psychotechnology is like putting new software on a hard drive, right? So you're not actually changing any of the physical things. You're just changing like how they're working together. An example of this might be something like language, right? So we're kind of hardwired to have a language, but we're not hardwired to speak English, right? So English would probably be like a psychotechnology where the need for a language in kind of like the abstract would be like something that evolution hardwired into our biology. And also, I should say, going back to ritual versus like the handshake where you're making things irrelevant, and versus like the shaman where you're trying to like really understand relevance, that the shamans practice, like a key thing to that practice is like disruption, right? So you can't just allow things to just like go on as to just be the same old, right? So it's all about adding disruption. And he talks about things like adding some disruption can be really good for giving like insight, right? And then he talks about the 9 dot problem, and that's where the term thinking outside the box comes. And I have a story for this, and you might not believe me because apparently nobody gets this right, but I actually was introduced to this in high school back in the 90s, and they introduced it to the class, and I actually got it. And I actually chalk this up to my autism, and that I kind of see things outside the box in most situations, so to speak. So I'm usually like offbeat to normal, like what is culturally expected of me in most things, and in 99% of the 99% of the situations, it actually just hurts me a lot more than it helps me. But in this one instance, I'm like the one, I guess, I don't know, 1 in 100 people or 1 in 1,000 people that actually can get it without without being given the answer. So I thought that was kind of interesting, even though it's more of a problem for me than like a strength. But I actually got it. As my memory goes, I actually realized that I could do it this way, and I asked the teacher, right? Instead of just doing it and like handing it in, I was like, "Well, do I have?" I asked the question, right? I said, "Do I have to make turns at the dots, right?" And they didn't answer, and partly because they didn't want to give the answer, but also because we were in a classroom, so there's a bunch of people in it, and I basically just spoiled the whole thing by asking the question. So, as I recall, my memory is that is because they didn't specify. I decided to ask the question, and the question just happened to be the right question. Yeah. So that was basically episode one. So, and that's all my commentary on episode one. If you're interested in this kind of subject, like awakening from the meaning crisis, you should definitely check it out. He has his own YouTube channel, and he does a lot of work there. Like I mentioned before, he has a book too, so that might be something to check out if you're interested in. I think I'll be checking it out here eventually as well. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed my commentary as well on Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, and my plan is to go through all 51 episodes, I think is the actual number, and give a little commentary on each one. So thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. So take care.